Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we will start to develop our first React application, which would be the To-Do app. The application that we are going to create will have all of these features. You will be able to add a new to-do item. You will be able to edit the to-do items inline, as in on the same page. Then you will be able to delete the to-do items which are not needed anymore, and you will be able to mark any to-do item as complete or incomplete. Let's have a look at the working example first. So this is how our app would look like. Here you would have the option to add a new to do. For example, here I was able to add a new to do. I will be able to edit that as well. The editing takes hold and I will be able to mark that as complete. I can revert the changes and again mark it as incomplete. And I have the option to delete that. If I click on cancel, the to do will not be deleted. And if I go ahead and click OK, the to do is removed. So this application that we see is a very great beginner's app to begin with. It gives you a clear understanding of component composition, how we need to think of component in terms of React, how we will structure our applications into different components, and map out the various functionalities that each of the component will have. We will reuse the components where needed. In the end, components that we create will come together to give the experience that we see on screen. And this application will also give you an understanding of how to use various libraries like React, Bootstrap, and Bootstrap. In this entire application, we will use Bootstrap for styling our application and some of the components that come out of the box from React Bootstrap. Hope you're looking forward to develop the application. Now, before we start, let's go back once. So before we start, there are certain prerequisites. First of them is we need to have Node.js installed on our machine. We also need to have Visual Studio Code installed on our machine, which we will be using to develop the application. And we should have a to-do application generated using Create React app. If you are not ready with any of these things, I would add a link to one of my first videos. Please go through that video. It covers the Create React app in detail. It'll give you a good understanding of how to install various tools that we need and how to get started with generating the application. Now, the next set of requirements is you should have a basic understanding of React. So, not end to end understanding, but what is React as a library? What are its features? What are components? How can we think in terms of components? What is JSX? And the two most important hooks that we will use today are use state and use effect. If you are aware of this, good. If not, here's the link to another video. Please go through that where I cover the React core concepts in detail and you will be ready and have a good understanding of everything mentioned here to get started. Now, the last requirement, we have some key JavaScript concepts that we need to be aware of. Let's go through them one by one. First one is destructuring assignment. So as we all know, variable assignments is when you declare a new variable and assign a new value to it. For example, if you have an array and I ask you to create three variables and assign the value of colors to those variables, this is one of the ways to do it. The destructuring assignment makes it easier in JavaScript to assign these variables. So here below you see we still have the colors array, but we can assign all the three variables in a single line using destructuring assignment for arrays. So first color still has the first value, which is red, second has the value green, and third color has the value blue. The destructuring assignment also works for objects. Let's have a look. So you had an object and you had to create three variables, name, age, and job. For these, one of the ways to do this is as we have showcased on the screen. You can refer to person.name, person.age, and person.job. But with object destructuring, this becomes much more concise and readable. You can see we have created a new object, name, age, and job, and assigned it to the person. And automatically, if the variable names match with the keys that you have in your object, the values will be assigned to respective variables. So name will still have the value John, age will have the value 30, and job would be set to engineer. You can also assign values when we are destructuring the assignments. For example, if the job information is not available, you want to default the job to intern, and that's how we can do it. As you can see, in the person, job is set to null. But when assigning, we are saying that, okay, if job does not exist, please use the value intern. And so name will have value John, age will have 30, and job will be set to intern because it is null in person. Now let's look at the second most important operator, which is the spread operator. This will be using heavily on our code, and I want to ensure that everyone understands this. Suppose you have two arrays, array 1 and array 2, and I ask you to merge those arrays. Give me a third array which has all of the values of array 1 and array 2. And in case there are any duplicates, we will merge them. And that's exactly what spread operator would do. Spread operator is represented by three dots. It allows us to spread out the elements of any iterable, like array or properties of an object. One of the tasks, as we can see on screen, is to merge. Another task is to copy. So you can copy an array into another array, and this will create a shallow copy of the array. So modifying the copied array will not impact your original array. Let's have a look at the object implementation for same. So here we can see we have two objects. First one is the person details, where name and age are available. Name John, age 30. The second object contains the job information of the same person, which is he's an intern in New York City. Now, if we have the need to create an object structure where I want to merge all the person details into a single object, I can do so by using the spread operator. So in merged object, using spread operator on object person and also on object job. And the final object that we get has all the four properties of both the objects. And it can also be used to copy the objects. If you want to create a copy of an object, it will create a shallow copy and give it to you. So modifying person copy will not change what's there in person object. The final piece that we need to understand is map. To understand map a little better, let's look at an example first. Suppose you have an array of numbers, and I ask you, give me a new array which contains all the keys of the array, it doubles them. So if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I want an array that gives me 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Double each of the value which was there in array 1. So this is how we would implement it without maps. And with map, entire implementation becomes much more concise and, as you can see, it's readable as well. So map function is useful when you want to apply a transformation to each item without changing the original array. And the method that you provide, arrow function num into 2, is the transformation. So we are telling map method that this is the transformation we want to apply on each of the numbers that you get. So it iterates over the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, doubles each of them, and whatever value comes out is stored into doubled numbers. And this works for array containing objects as well. For example, you have an array of people which contains three objects of three different people and their ages. And I ask you to give me an array containing all the names that are there in the people's array. And this is how we can implement it using the map method. You just pass for each person, give me person.name, and it gives you the exact same thing which was there on the left hand side. These were all the three major concepts that we had to understand before we dive into development. And now let's look at the application once more, and then we will talk about component breakdown. So this application that we discussed at the beginning of the course is the one that we will be developing. It will have a to-dos app. This is a to-do input. This section containing 4 to-do items is to-do list, and individual components are to-do items. And whenever we are editing anything inside the item, this input that comes up is the same input component that we see on top. So we are reusing the to-do input. Now let's visualize this same experience in terms of component breakdown. So here is the component breakdown for the application that we saw on screen. The component tree starts with app. Your app will contain a to-do application, and this to-do application will render two things, one of which would be to-do input as we saw on top, and then the to-do list just below it. Inside to-do list, we will have to-do item, which represents each of the single items. We iterate over the array of to-dos that we have, and inside to-do item, we will use to-do input to showcase the did states. Now with this understanding, let's go ahead, dive into the code and start writing our application. All right, so here we have our to-do app, which is a fresh out of create React app project that we have generated. In case you have some other changes in your generated project, please go ahead and remove them so that we all start from the very same place, or you can generate a completely new project to do app and get started with that. First thing that we need to do is we will clean up any of the files that we do not need. And in here, I'll go ahead and delete the CSS files, delete the index.css, delete, fix the imports for them, clear, fix the app.css import. And actually in app.css, we do not need any of the imports and even the return statement. Let's go ahead and clear this. For now, let's just add an h1 to do app, and that should be good. In your index, let's see, we look good. And so the cleanup is done. Now the next set of changes that we need to do is, so we need to install some of the dependencies that we discussed, which are React Bootstrap, and React Bootstrap icons. Before we go ahead and install them, let's have a look at what they are. So this is the homepage for React Bootstrap. And this is the React wrapper around Bootstrap, which is the library that I'm opening right now. This is the homepage for Bootstrap, getbootstrap.com. And in here, to get a comprehensive look into what the library offers, go to docs. And you see this offers a ton of utilities. So you have your grid layout, you have your columns, you have your components available. In these components, there are some out of the box components like accordion. If you have the need for an accordion in your project, you have that available. You have different types of buttons available. So you have all these variations of buttons, some of which we will use in our project. And then you have a lot of utility classes. For example, when you want to apply flex layout to something, you can just add deflex. To apply padding and margin, you have the spacing classes. So margin top, margin start, margin end, padding X as in left and right. P3 will be applied to all the sides. So these are a lot of utility classes which we would use in our applications a lot. And you don't have to learn all of them, but just a good thing to be aware of in case you need to look into further documentation. So Bootstrap offers us a set of icons as well. If I want a checkbox icon, I can see what type of check icons are available. You have check, check circle, check fill, all of these, and we can use any of these in our project. Now React Bootstrap and React Bootstrap icons. These are wrappers around the same components that we saw just now. So here also it provides you the same number of components with the same functionality, but can be used as a React component, which will make our workflows a lot easier and make it easier to work with the React component based architecture in general. So that is why we will go ahead and install React Bootstrap, and React Bootstrap icons. Let's go ahead and do that. In here, all you need to do is type npm I is the short form for install. Wait for the installation to be finished. Until the installation is going on, whenever you install any new library, for example, we just installed React Bootstrap, and Bootstrap icons. Those entries are automatically added to your package.json. If you want to share your project with anyone for reference, you just need to zip in everything except node modules and you can share it with them, or you can check it in Git. And when they run the same npm install command, just npm install looks for all the packages that are mentioned in package.json and will install all of them. So the application will be running as soon as they run the installation and start, given that they have node and npm installed. Yeah, that was a call out. Now let's go ahead and add our Bootstrap CSS onto our project. How we can do that is we can go ahead and here add the import for the CSS file. And here we have added bootstrap.main.css onto our project. Let's see how the project looks like. We'll just run npm start on the project. This should open up your localhost server on localhost 3000. Here it is. So we see Bootstrap is already applied onto our page. Let's have a look. The fonts are coming directly out of Bootstrap library. And here we can see in console as well. So it's taking from Node Modules Bootstrap SCSS. Let's go ahead and add some React Bootstrap components onto our project. We go here and put everything inside a container so it looks clean. You can add an import for container on top, or you can auto import it after just typing import container from React Bootstrap. Compilation is successful and you see Todo App comes up properly within a container. Let's go ahead and clear this so that console is a little less distracting. For this, we can directly go to our index.html and delete the comment that we see at the very end. Remaining are not visible directly, but yes. Now we save it and it should be gone. Close this and we see, yeah, looks better. Now we see even though to-do app comes up within a container, it's still slightly sticking to the top. Let's add some padding to top and bottom. And we can use utility classes for those, which we just saw. For to-do app, so py mentions that around y-axis we want to add some padding. Let's add 3, which would be around 1 rem. And here we can see to-do app looks a little better now. Let me minimize the terminal so it's less distracting. I'll go ahead and just pull it down. So the server is still running. Don't worry about it. Now let's go ahead and start creating the components that we discussed in our initial component tree. For that, let's go ahead and right click, create a new folder called components. And in this, let's create 4 components that we need. One would be to do app.js. Here, let's write our component, which would be export function to do app. And here we can directly return h2 to do app component. Save it and copy it because we would need to replicate this across. So let's go ahead and create a new file to do input.js, paste it and change the name to do input. Selecting a string and pressing Ctrl Shift L will select all instances of that string. That's what I did. Let's create a new file. This would be to do list.js. And finally, new file to do item.js item. Great. Now in our to do app component, let's go ahead and create the initial structure. So your app component, let's add a wrapping div for now. Inside this would be responsible for importing to do input, add an import for to do input and include it. And below that, it would be responsible for showing to do list. These 2 components. Then we go to our to do list. To do list would be responsible for showing to do item. So we add the difference for to do item here. Let's add an import. So to do item is available now and to do input already has this and to do list has to do item. Now let's add this to do app into our app.js. So we start to see something on our screen. So to do app, save it, go back to our running application and we can see to do input component and to do item component, which is coming via the list. That's great. Now let's start writing some code into our to do application. So to do app is the entry point or shell container, which will have all the functionality for our application. Let's start mapping out what all functionalities would it be responsible for. This would be the component responsible for delegating everything to remaining components. So it will maintain the master list of to-dos. Here const to-dos, set to-dos, and our first use state with the initial value of your empty array. So by default, it should be an empty array. Now, the functionalities that we need to write are add to do. Let's add a placeholder function for that const add to do. Then we have update to do. We would be able to update via the to do items. We will be able to delete the to dos. So delete to do. So all good so far. And then the last method that we would have here is toggle completion status. Now, looking at the methods and the to-dos that we have, we need to define a structure that we will use for our to-do objects. What do I mean by that? So, you're updating a to-do. You will definitely update something that is visible to the user. And whenever you're deleting a to-do, you need to be able to identify that unique to-do item from the list. If we use only the names in an array, we won't be able to clearly distinguish between them. Because if user adds 2 similar to-dos or exactly the same to-dos which he needs to do 2 times in a day, we would miss out on identifying them uniquely. So let's finalize a structure. This is just temporary. It's temporary data structure layout for reference. And here what we would do is const to do just the structure is equals to, we would have an ID which would be of type number 1 2 3 4. Then we will have text, the text that user would see, do something, and then we have completion status called completed, which would be set to false by default. Looks like a good structure to me. You would be able to uniquely identify using the IDs. Text is something that can be updated, and completion status can be toggled in these methods. Now, using that as a reference, let's start writing the outline functionalities that we would need in our add to do. If I ask you, I want to add something to my array of to dos, which is of this format, how we would go about is while adding a to do, we definitely need an input, which we would set as text. Now we create a new to do const new to do is equals to, we'll reuse the same structure above, copy, paste. That's the reason why we created it. ID, for now, let's let it be 123. This will help us showcase another key concept down the course. Text, we will map the text to the input that is passed from the user, and completed will be initialized with false. Now we need to set this to our set to dos. How do we do that? We use the callback version of our setter, and here we get the previous to dos, spread out all the existing to dos which already exist so that we do not mess up anything in the array. And then we add our new to do at the very end. So we are using the operators that we learned at the beginning of this course. This is the spread operator that we use to spread out the array and added a new item to this array. So now we are setting a completely new to do. Let me add this to my user dictionary. Spelling, user settings, and this would make all the errors go away related to to-dos not being a valid word. Next, we'll have the functionality of delete to-do. So for deleting to-do, we only need the ID as an identifier. And what we would do here is, we will filter out the objects that we do not need anymore in our system. So based on this ID, we can perform a search. And if the ID does not match, we will return true. If ID matches, that means that particular to-do is to be removed and we can filter it out. So const filtered to-dos is equals to to-dos dot filter to-do dot ID not equal to the ID that we passed. And again, do the same thing, set to-dos to filtered to-dos. And this should delete anything that matches with the ID that we passed. So the filter method iterates over the objects, and if true is returned, that is kept in the array. For a false entity, it would be removed. It would be false when the ID matches, and it will filter out that particular item. Now, update and toggle complete will be very similar in implementation. And here we will use the map method that we just saw at the beginning of our course. Let's write any one of those. Let's start with toggle complete, because here also, very similar to delete, we only need an ID. And here what we would do is we would use map method, and map method will return us a new array. Const updated to-dos is equals to to-dos dot map, and here we will get individual to-dos. What do we need to do to these to-dos? Let's work on it. Wherever to-do dot ID is equal to the ID that we are passing, I want to take all the properties of existing to-do. So I spread out the to-do, and I just update the completed status to not of to-do dot completed. If our to-do is false, it will be set to true. And if our to-do is already true, it would be set to false. So this would help us toggle the state. And then we'll have our to-do here. We need to set this back to to-dos, updated to-dos. We'll walk through the functionality once again once we implement it. It would be better then. And let's copy this. As I mentioned, the functionality for toggle and update is very similar. Only difference being, here we will take the new input and ID both. And instead of completed, we will update the text to the new input set by the user. And that way we have all our methods defined, populated, and ready to go to be consumed. Now let's start working on our to-do input. And here we will see how we can pass props from parent to child and call the methods that we have defined here. Let's go ahead and do that. Open the to-do input, and first thing is we will map out the functionalities very similar to our to-do application, what this component would be responsible for. Very first thing which I can think of is this would be responsible for tracking users' inputs. So const We define a new state variable input. The default value for now, let's set it to empty string, but we will ultimately use a prop to set it. Now, the second thing that it would be responsible for is, if you remember the initial application, it had a input box at the very top, which we will put inside a form. So we need to handle submit event on that particular form. So this would be const handle submit is equals to, we will get the form submit event, which by default refreshes the page. So one thing which we definitely need to do is prevent default, because we do not want to refresh the page. We will handle the functionality ourselves. These two are the core methods, and we also need to ensure we update the markup to include some of the components from React, Bootstrap, icons, and everything. So let's import them first. Import from React Bootstrap. Let's see what components do we need. First, we would be needing a form component to wrap our input. And then for inputs, if you look at the documentation, React Bootstrap, go to form section. And if you look at form text, so this is ultimately a form control. So if you are importing form, you already get access to form label, form control, and everything. To make it look a little better, we will use input group. And inside input group, you can have form control and another control. So we will have a form control and a button. Let's go ahead and implement that. So form, button, and input group. I think these should be sufficient. And then we need to show an icon from React Bootstrap icons. What would be the icon? Since we are adding something, I want to use the plus icon. Save the file. Let's get to the implementation. We will have a form at top, form, close it, and in form we have multiple events, one of which would be on submit. Here, what do we want to do? We want to call handle submit. Great. Now we have input group, and inside input group we will have form control, form dot control. Now this form control has multiple configurable attributes or props. One of them is, you can mention these are all the attributes which are available. I want type, and type would be text. So this should give me a text field. We can have a placeholder text, and placeholder is not a replacement for your label. So this placeholder text should give user some context about what they have to do in this text box. So let's put a name of the task, do laundry. That's good. Two of the main properties that we need to bind now are value, which would be bound to our state variable input. And since this is a text box, user will type in something. And whenever user types, we need to ensure that the input gets updated appropriately. On change, in the change event, I need to set my input to e.target.value. So people who are already familiar with JavaScript and have worked with HTML forms, they know in change event, we get the value of a text box using e.target.value. So this way, whenever user types something, you get that immediately updated onto your form control. Now, button, we are already handling on submit at our form level. So this could be of type submit. Having a submit button at a form level gives a very useful functionality that when you press enter, the form will automatically submit itself and call the on submit handler. So that way, it's a much more user friendly way of adding to dos. You can write and press enter. And here, let's add the icon that we were using along with a text add. And let's go to our running application to check how it looks. Here we have our input box and button coming up. Just to ensure that it always takes 100% width, let's go ahead and add that width 100 utility class. So class name is equals to width 100. That way it will always take up 100% of the width of the container where it is placed. Now let's handle the functionality. Whenever this button is pressed, the handle submit method is called. But right now it doesn't do anything. Here we actually need to call the parents method of add to do. How do we pass that? We pass that through props. For to do input, you can add a new prop on submit, and we need to tell what it needs to do on submit. It needs to call add to do method. And now let's go back to our to do input and add a console log. Console.log Now we need to take in some properties. We are passing something from the parent which we need to consume here. Props, prop in to do input props. And let's go back to our application, to console, and here we can see prop in to do input is on submit. The method that we passed is available on the same name. We can call it by just calling on props.onSubmit, or since we already know about destructuring, we can destructure it here that on submit would be available. And now if I log the same thing, you would see it gives me the definition now. Now we don't need this console log. We know our on submit is coming up. Let's go ahead and call that on submit method. And let's add a condition that we should not add any empty values. So if input is defined, then only call on submit. And what do we call it with? We pass the input value to our list. But even if we pass something, we won't be able to visualize it in our app.js for now. So what we can do just for now is let's add a json.stringify. Because this is JSX, we can do some JS computations within our render markup. So json.stringify to-dos. So any to-do that we add to our code will be visible as a JSON string on page. Let's have a look. And right now it is empty. Let's go ahead and add something. Adding to do. Press enter. We see adding to do comes up on page. Adding to do once more. Press enter. It comes up again. It should ideally be clearing out the text box whenever we add something. That's good for user experience, and it will allow them to add more values in a better way. With React, this change is very easy to implement. Let's go ahead and do that. Now, whenever in our to do input, we call on submit, let's set input back to an empty string. Save it, and that's all that was needed. Adding to do again, press enter, and it clears the text box. So here our input field is working as it should. Now let's go ahead and update the list component where we should be able to pass this to-dos and render them in a to-do. For now, it will be a very small implementation and we'll expand on it later. So come back to our to-do app, and in here in to-do list, let's pass to-dos as to-dos. Go to our to-do list. We will destructure those to-dos so they're available, and now we need to map over them. So here we need to put a wrapping div because in JSX only one root element can be returned. And let's write the functionality of mapping over the to-dos. To-dos is an array. So todos.map will give you access to each of the to-do item. And for these to-do items, what I need to do? I need to pass them down to my to-do item as prop. So here I'm calling the to-do item and passing my to-do as prop, the individual to-do. One thing to take a note of is whenever you're iterating over an array and rendering a markup inside, we always need to ensure that there is a key property available which is unique, always unique, to help React identify the elements individually. Else, it causes multiple issues. Since our to-dos already have an ID, let's go ahead and add that to-do.id. And we'll see the issue that I was talking about. Let's go back to our application. Before that, let's go ahead and delete this json.stringify. We don't need that anymore. And also, in our to-do list, even though we are passing the to-do, we are not consuming it inside. So let's change this. For now, I'll just have this to-do, and I'll get to-do.text. Why am I fetching to-do.text? Because if you go to our to-do app, the reference object that we have added, our to-dos will have an ID, text, and completion status, where the text is the property that we will display to our end users. And that's why we pass the list of to-dos down to our to-do list. To-do list delegates the responsibility of rendering the individual to-do item by iterating over them and passing the individual items to to-do item. And then to-do item will take those to-dos and render the text out in an H2. The functionality for to-do item will be much more than this. For now, we just want to see the render. Let's go ahead, refresh it once again. Action item 1. Now I'll add action item 2 and look at the console. Encountered two children with same key 1, 2, 3. Keys should be unique so that components maintain their identity across updates. This is the issue that I was talking about. Now React is having trouble to identify the two different nodes that were rendered in a loop. Let's help React resolve this. How we can do that is, for now, whenever we are creating an add to do, we are adding 123 as the ID. We can make that much more robust by adding date.now. What date.now will do is it will give you access to a timestamp. So date.now will give you the current timestamp. And if I type it again, since time keeps on increasing, seconds are passing, thus timestamp keeps on updating and you will always get a unique number whenever you call it. As long as you're not adding multiple to-dos in a single millisecond, you should be fine. With that, let's see if our issue was resolved. Test item 1, test item 2. And yes, now since the IDs are unique, we don't run into that issue anymore, and React is able to uniquely identify each of the elements. Now let's go ahead and map out the remaining functionality that we need at a to-do item level. So to-do item would probably be as complex, if not more, than app.js because we are doing too many things at an item level. We can edit the components, we can delete them, we can mark them as complete. And all this goes into our component. Let's start mapping those out. What is the first thing that we would need? We would maintain edit state. So you would need a state variable. Const is editing, set is editing is equals to use state, and by default the editing mode is set to false. So it will only be editing when you explicitly click on edit icon. Second, we need to handle the edits or handle the updates to the input item. So handle updates to input. This would be our method. It would take a new input, the change that user has made. And what we need to do in this case is we will call the update to do method that we have defined in app.js down at our to do item level. How can we pass it? We need to pass it to our props, and we cannot directly pass it to do item because to do item is rendered through our to do list. So let's pass the function to do list first, and then we will pass it to do item. Whenever you're adding multiple props onto a component, it's always a good idea to keep them in separate lines for better readability. If there are more than 3 to 4 props, always have them in separate lines. And here we pass the update to do method to our to do list. Let's destructure that and pass it down to our to do item. So again, we are going beyond two properties. Let's add that. And here we pass the update to do and then destructure the update to do and call the update to do. So we call the update to do. What do we need to call it with? Let's check the signature. We need to pass a new input and an ID. We already have the new input. How do we get the ID? Do we have it on our component? And yes, we do. We have the ID at this to do object. So to do dot ID will be passed. And once we are done, we have already handled the update. I think we should come out of edit mode. Else we won't be able to see our updates. So set is editing should be set to false. Now all that is left is writing the markup. So let's start up writing our markup now. What do we need to do here? First, let's wrap everything in a div. Now, as we know, we are maintaining an edit state. So if user is editing, we will showcase something. If not, then something else. And that's usually how you should start writing your conditional statements. Now, when user is editing, what do we want to do? We want to showcase a to do input. Let's wrap that in a div as well. In our to do input, if you see, on submit is a mandatory property. So we need to ensure that on submit is always passed, else your component will break. So on submit, we want to call the handle update method. So whenever that submit button or add button will be clicked, automatically it will call handle update method, and handle update method will call the update method inside our to do. We'll see that in action. And now when we are in non-edit mode, we just want to visualize the component or show the state of the component right now. Let's wrap this in div as well. And here let's visualize it. We want to show the text at the very beginning and then the three buttons at the very end of our form. Now we will use a lot of utility classes to construct that visual layout that we had in our mind. How can we do that? It starts with a div. Now, logically, we are splitting our view into two parts. So let's create two more divs. One of the divs, which will contain our text, let's split it into 3:1 layout. So if you have 100% layout available, we will go ahead and allocate 75%, which is W75 class coming out of Bootstrap. It's a width utility class. So we allocated 75% of the width to this div and 25% let's allocate to the div that is containing our buttons. That way you will see this come up in a proper 3:1 ratio. And here let's use a span to showcase our text so that in case any style that we want to apply at a later stage are limited to this span rather than at the entire div of 75%. For now, just to do dot text. Let's add the buttons. So for now, we won't worry about the functionality of the buttons, but let's add 3 buttons. Button from React Bootstrap, correct? And the variant for first one would be secondary, and that's it. Let's replicate it 3 times. Now we need to add some text or icon inside our buttons. So first, what we would do is we would use this for editing. The first button is for edit. The second button would be for delete. And the third button we will use for complete. Let's go to Bootstrap to find icons for all the 3 states. Here, go to icons. I want to edit. So a pencil icon would be a good choice. Let's use pencil fill. So how can we use that? You go to import from React Bootstrap Icons. And in this, we want pencil fill, which is the next icon. Let's look for the next one. So we can look for delete. So we have a lot of icons for delete. Let's go ahead and use this X icon. So comma X. And the third and last icon is we want to mark our item as complete. So usually a check sign. Let's see. This looks good. So check circle, and final icon. Whenever we have marked it as complete, we also need to undo. Arrow counterclockwise. Then arrow counterclockwise. So these are all the 4 icons that we will use in our buttons. Let's replace them. So edit will be replaced by pencil fill. Delete will be replaced by X. And for complete, for now, let's just have check circle. Now let's have a look how our items look like on screen. Go back to our application, and this is your test item 1, and it has this pencil icon, cross icon, and check icon. Let's add some margin to our icons and align them in line. How do we align them in line? At the top div, let's go ahead and add a class name where we will assign display flex to this. That should take care of, yes, inlining them, and width 100 so that it takes up 100% of the allocated width. And let's have a look. So this div looks very big right now, 100% width. Let's restrict the overall available space to around 75%. And how we can do that is we will have class name, again the utility class width 75, and let's have mx auto. So mx auto will have equal margin from left and right. So you can see margin right auto, margin left auto, which centers our individual to do items. Now let's add some margin start to these 2 buttons so that all 3 are separated properly. For this, these 2 buttons, let's set a class name. You can press Alt in your VS Code to type on multiple lines. And this is ms margin start 0.5 rem. Yes, it's applied. Margin start to applied and coming up properly. Now our items also need to be vertically spaced with each other. Right now the buttons are sticking to each other. Let's fix that. So that at the individual item level, margin top. Great. So now every item will have a margin top of 1 rem from each other. That way they'll come up properly in a sequence. Let's add the same width to this div as well. And let's add the edit functionality for now. So we already have this pencil fill. Whenever user clicks on this, on click, set is editing to. So what we did is on click, we are setting is editing to not state. So automatically it will be set to true. Let's try that. And here we see we have the input box come up. But right now, it is not showing the value of the action item. Let's refresh to see that once again. This should be editable. Another item to edit. Now, if I click on edit, the ideal behavior would be whenever you click on edit, this entire to do item should become editable. I'll click on this and the text should be populated here, which it's not. Let's add that functionality quickly. We'll go back to our to do input and we need to pass an initial value here. And since this will be optional and this has to be optional, we cannot enforce initial value. But in this case, since this would be available and it would be set to do dot text. How do we consume this in our input? We can take the initial value, and as we already discussed in destructuring assignment, we can assign a default. So initial value, if not available, should be set to an empty string. And instead of initializing with empty string, we can use initial value for the initialization. Now let's go back to our code and we can see the value comes up. Whenever you click on edit, the value automatically populates on input box. Exactly what we needed. Now we need for a way to come out of edit mode. Right now we are stuck here. I'll again have to refresh the page, add these items, or I can go ahead and add the exit functionality or set the edit mode to false once again. Let's do that. Go back to our to do item. In to do item, just below our text, just below our to do input, we will add a button. Variant would be set to secondary again. Class name, we need it to be separated from this button. So margin start, again we will add some value here so that it looks consistent. So ms2 or 3, let's add 3. And then we define on click, and as we already discussed, on click, what do we need to do? We need to set is editing to false. So here on click of this, we will set the edit mode to false. This will help us come out of our edit mode. And let's use the same X icon. Here it is. So this should be editable. I click on it, I come out of edit mode. But this button alignment, even though the space is available, it's not taking up. You see? Let's fix that. So along with width 25, what do we need to do? We need to ensure that we make it display flex and we justify our content to end. So these are all utility classes already there in the Bootstrap's documentation. Let's have a look. Now, great. The alignment of the buttons is there and buttons are always stretching to the very end. Much better. Now, the item, this one looks good. This one is self-contained, has a sort of border because of the input, but individual items should also have some border around it. How can we add that? We can add that by adding just border class here. You see, the border comes up. But now border is missing spacing from the text. Let's add spacing. Now we have some spacing, but border doesn't have rounded corners. Let's add those. Just add a space, rounded. Now it's rounded as well. But text is now not centered vertically. How do we do that? We add display flex once again and align items center. Now text is centered. Our to-do looks much better now. If I come out of edit mode, each of the to-dos are easily identifiable and you can edit them and come out. That's great. What happens if I click on delete? Nothing. It's a quick functionality to wire in. Let's do that now. I'll go into my to-do app and delete is not being used right now. And also toggle complete. We need both of them in our to-do item. Let's go ahead and pass both of them through our to-do list. So copy one, delete to-do is passed. Let's destructure it in our to-do list. Pass this and destructure this in our. Now let's pass the second one, which is toggle complete. So the reason why we are doing one by one is we need to ensure that we don't miss out. If I do at bulk and we miss out on one step, it could cause some debugging issues, which we want to avoid. So now toggle complete. and here toggle complete, and we destructure toggle complete. Now we have both the methods available. For delete to do, what's the call signature? We just need to pass an ID that we want to delete. Let's do that in this on click for this ID. Let's see if it's working. I'll delete. It deleted without a confirmation, which is not a very good experience. I could have clicked that button by mistake. Let's change that. We go back to our app, and here we add a confirmation message. So for people who don't know, Window already has a confirm object which can be used to show an alert, take some feedback from the user, whether they want to take an action or not. Let's use that. Const result. It will provide us with a Boolean result, and how we need to call it is window.confirm the message that we want to show. Are you sure you want to delete? And if they select yes, then only delete this, please. Else let it be. Let's see if this is working now. I added that. I'll go ahead and click on delete. Are you sure you want to delete? I don't want to, and it does not delete it anymore. And if I still click on yes, it'll go ahead and clear that off. Great. Now let's mark as complete. This is doing nothing as of now. We go back to our application, go to Todo-Item, and as you already know, on click, now we need to call toggle complete. And what's the call signature of toggle complete? It also takes an ID. That's good. So same as this one, we'll copy, paste, and instead of delete, we will call toggle complete. So this will toggle the state. But now let's add a console log here so that it's actually getting called. You'll understand that in a minute. Console.log toggle called. So in console, I'll click on this toggle now. You see, toggle gets called, but since we have not handled the visual elements of our to-do item, we don't see it on screen. Let's add the visual controls. Whenever completion status changes, we will cross this and add a class so that this entire item appears a little different. Go back to our to-do item, and what we need to do is this is our init state. The good thing is we are in JSX, so we can add a computation here, add a space, and here I want to compute if to do is completed. In that case, add an alert class with the success variation. Else, don't do anything. And let me word wrap so that you can see everything on screen. In later courses, I will walk you through some of the utilities which would make this a lot easier to understand. Some class name utilities and other things which would help with computation and make our classes much more readable. But for now, this is good enough. So here we are conditionally, whenever it's completed, we apply the alert and alert success class. Let's see. Great. So now toggle called is getting called and we get some visual feedback. If you undo, this doesn't do. And also our button does not change the icon or the text is also not striked out. Let's add those. So now we will change the variant to have a visual indicator in place. How we can do that is, so here what we've mentioned is if to do is completed, show me a dark variation, else show me a success variation. I'll go ahead and click this. It changes to dark and again this. Now let's change the icon as well in a very similar manner. I'll put these onto different lines. Now it would be better. Copy this condition, paste it inside curly braces and add the fallback. So our check circle is something that should come up when it's not complete. So if it's not completed, then show me check circle, else show me the arrow counterclockwise, the icon that we already imported at the very beginning of our component. Now let's see if this is complete. It shows me this undo arrow and changes it back. And now just to cross this out, there's a simple class that we can add with the same computation in mind, and that class is Let's copy the computation first and add a class name is equals to paste. If it is completed, I want to showcase text decoration line 3. So just a line through my text box. Complete, line through, undo. So let's see if everything on our component is working as we expect it to or not. So I'll add another item, paste the to-do app. This is an item. Editing is working. Delete works. Mark completion works. And finally, done. So this is a to-do application, which we discussed at the very beginning. All the items that we had to develop are complete. Let's have a walk down the components. You have your application, which has your H1 and is rendering your to-do application. You have your to-do app, which has the core functionality. We don't need this anymore. Let's delete that. Yeah. Maintains the master list of to-dos. You can add a to-do. You can update the to-do, delete to-do, and toggle completion status. And for all of these, we are using the key concepts that we read at the very beginning of our course, the spread operator and destructuring assignments. How do we plug in components? Your to-do app is rendering to-do input and to-do list, and it passes down the functions as props which we need to call. So here, to-do input is working both for adding a new item and editing the existing items. And this is the power of props. Here, to-do input is calling a method which is add to create a new to-do for us from the values that we provide. And whenever you're in to-do item, it helps you edit the input using the different set of props that we provide from this component. And that's what we can see. It delegates the responsibility to parent. So you can pass anything in on submit method that will be called and it will send you the value that is entered by the user. And you can set an initial value. And that really helps us. And then to-do list is the leanest component. It only delegates the responsibility of rendering each of the to-do item to the to-do item component. And our to-do item component maintains an edit state. When you're editing, a different set of markup comes up, and else the view markup comes up. And in our view markup, we used a lot of utility classes to ensure that our markup looks the way we want it to. Let's go ahead and delete any console log that we do not need. And we have added buttons with icons to showcase them. Yes. And with all these applications wired in where you can control your editing, you can delete a to-do, you can toggle completion status on a to-do, and you can edit a to-do. Our application is complete and looks very well. This is amazing. You can go ahead and play with this application. You can create additional buttons which will help you sort your to-dos. You can click on up arrow to make it go up. You can click on down arrow to make it go down. And this can be done again by destructuring and playing with arrays. You can change the index, rearrange the index, and do all of those things. Now, I would like to take a sidebar to talk through a very important concept which you should be aware of, which is accessibility. So, for people who are not aware of accessibility, imagine using an application where you can't see the buttons, read the text, or even interact with certain parts of the application. This is the reality for millions of users with disabilities, whether it's vision impairments, motor disabilities, or cognitive challenges. Making our applications accessible isn't just a nice to have feature. It's about respecting users and ensuring everyone can have a good experience when they visit your applications. So, accessibility refers to designing and building applications, websites, or any product that we're creating in a way that allows everyone to use them, including people with disabilities. So, accessibility helps with inclusivity. It helps you ensure that everyone can use the software or program that you're building. And it's also a legal and ethical responsibility from our end to ensure that we are delivering application that is accessible compliant. Why am I talking about accessibility? It's because we have some buttons in our application that only contain icons. While these might look simple and visually intuitive for most users, they can create real challenges for people who can't see the icons or recognize their function based on the visual appearance alone. This is where ARIA labels come in. So, before we start implementing ARIA label, add labels and context to our buttons, let's pull everything onto separate line. Now this ARIA label that I talk about is spelled as ARIA label. And here ARIA's ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. So using ARIA label, you can add any label to your button elements which have icons only, or even in other contexts. But for now, let's refer to this one. Here, write out the functionality that your button is doing. So edit to do item. Copy this. In this one, we are deleting the to do item. And for the last one, since it's a complex logic, let's copy the logic and have conditional ARIA labels. So when to do is not complete, we want to say mark to do as complete. And when your to do is complete, we want to mark as incomplete. So these are conditional labels. We also have a button here. Let's add the ARIA label there as well. And here it would be exit edit mode. This is good. Any other icons that we are missing on our application? No, I think we are good. Now let's have a look at our application. So this does not change anything about your application, the look and feel, but ARIA labels are now coming up. So you can see when I change, mark as incomplete now comes up on this button. So whenever you're using voice readers, it will read out mark as incomplete, mark as complete. And this is first step in the right direction towards what is called an accessible experience. This is something that I would cover at much more depth in later courses, but I just wanted us to be aware of what is accessibility, how we can make accessible applications. This is not completely accessible by any means, but it's a step in the right direction. And also, as you keep on developing applications, you will understand various use cases which we need to consider while writing accessible experiences. This was a sidebar that I wanted to cover because it's a very important concept and also ensures that our experiences are inclusive and compliant. Hope you had a great time developing this application. I did. Look forward to developing more experiences in future. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.